Hi everyone, thank you for attending this workshop. My name is Marina and my presentation is about dogs. Oops, no, not these dogs. Dogs is actually a privacy-preserving blockchain-supported group signature schemes with a distributed opening functionality. Through dogs, we want participants to no longer depend on a central authority to identify the signer of a potentially fraudulent message. Indeed, huge problems arise in this centralized architecture when that entity is compromised. For instance, signatures may be open, which then breach user privacy, or not correctly opened, hence preventing accountability of the participants. I organized today's talk in 6 sections. I will begin by summarizing the main features for group signature schemes, which are the basis for our protocol. I'll also show you their main limitations in terms of security, namely in terms of anonymity, traceability, and non-flammability. I will briefly discuss the existing literature and improvements performed over the years. I'll show you that related work usually considers a unique entity to be playing the role of the opener or the role of the tracing key generator, inducing strong assumptions of the level of trust in such an entity as well as its resilience. I will propose to use an alternative way to perform key distribution, namely to use distributed key generation protocols, and I will detail its use through the presentation of dogs. And finally, by reviewing the contribution of this work in terms of security, we will conclude this talk. What you should know about group signature schemes is that they provide authenticated yet anonymous communications to a certain extent. The initial concept as presented by Schaum and Van Eest in 1991 considers a set of users. So do not be surprised. Through the slide, I will use the vehicular ad hoc network to illustrate the core cryptographic concepts of this presentation, though they are more generic and can be applied to other applications. So the paper identifies a group manager, which defines a group of group members and is responsible for the admission and the revocation of these members. A group member can issue a signature on behalf of the group. This has the benefit of producing a signature that is verifiable by other group members, while the signer's identity stays hidden to other group members, preserving its anonymity. However, the group manager has the ability to disclose the signer's identity by opening its signature. This provides traceability. However, the group manager is a major privacy threat because it has too much power over regular group members. Let me show you why. In addition to the correctness and unforgettability properties inherited from the digital signature definition, Bellare, Michancho, and Warinsky, and then Bellare, Shi, and Zhang define the formal security requirements respectively for static and dynamic group signature schemes and include the following properties. First, they define the anonymity as being this property that ensures both the anonymity of the signer and unlinkability of its signatures. Here, you see group members verifying the signature as one belonging to another group member. The second property is traceability. The scheme should implement a way to trace the signer and should be resistant against coalition. And finally, the non-flammability property, which regroups unforgeability of the signatures, exculpability, coalition resistance, and protection against framing attacks. In short, it should be resistant against anything that would prevent the group manager from identifying the correct signer of a message. Now the big question is, what happens if the group manager is compromised? And why would this be such a major privacy threat? Well, everything transits by the group manager. In terms of anonymity, well, it can deliberately and arbitrarily reveal the identity of the signer. In terms of traceability, it can instead decide not to reveal the real identity of the signer at all, or replace it by another member's identity. In terms of non-flammability, well, it can issue a group signature with any group member's identity. So as a conclusion, if the group manager is compromised, none of anonymity, traceability, and non-flammability is guaranteed. In this paper, we got interested by Bellare-Shi-Zhang proposition to split the group manager into two entities, namely the issuer and the opener. They have two distinct roles. The issuer interacts with users to verify their credential when they ask to join the group. Hence, users become group members. The issuer also keeps track of the relationship between the real-world identities of the users and their corresponding local keys. On the other hand, the opener is only called when a signature needs to be opened. It is the entity in charge of lifting the anonymity of the signatures, and therefore in charge of protecting it. Once it opened a signature and has access to the public local identity of the signer, it sends this result to the issuer for full identification. The problem is that this system is still very centralized around the opener and the issuer. Privacy threats arise when one or the other is compromised. Of course, if both are, then we go back to the previous case and we're doomed. If the issuer is compromised, then the relationships between the real-world identities and the local ones can be modified. The traceability property is violated, but the signatures are still protected by the integrity of the opener. The one thing the adversary learns is that the certain person were in a certain area during a certain time. They do not learn anything else, like, for instance, the path they took or anything. Now, if the opener is compromised, well, the adversary can arbitrarily open signatures and reveal the corresponding local identities. An adversary may therefore infer the path of the victim by analyzing all the messages it signed and potentially disclose its identity. So we show that in the previous section that compromising the opener is the most serious threat regarding user privacy. In dogs, we propose then to get a step further and distribute its role among the group members. On the left side of the slide, you see Bellare-Shi and Zhang model of a group signature with an issuer and an opener. In this case, the public key of the opener, OPK, corresponds to one secret key known to the opener only. On the right side, you see Dog's proposition with one issuer and the definition of a group of sub-openers. The corresponding opening key is still called OPK, but the corresponding secret key does not exist in the system. Instead, it is the result of the cooperation between the sub-openers. There is no unique way to share a secret, right? You may know the secret sharing schemes introduced independently by Shamir and Blackley, or distributed key generation protocols which rely on for instance, a joint Feldman protocol. Which one is the most suited to our case? Well, let's begin with a brief overview of the secret sharing schemes. The system takes as input one secret and gives it either to the blue card itself or a trusted third party. It doesn't really matter at this point. The problem stays the same, as we will understand. The scheme outputs n shares of the original secret and distributes each one to a user. The scheme here is run by the trusted third party. There are many variants, of course, of this scheme, all with their own peculiarities. However, secret sharing schemes suffer the same drawback. All the shares of the secret exist in one location at one point in time. So what happens if the trusted third party is compromised? Well, denial of service can happen, secret share disclosure, or rather all attacks that exploit a single point of failure. Can we bypass decentralization? Well, I guess the answer is yes, and we are doing it by using a distributed key generation protocol. Distributed key generation allows a set of users to collaborate and produce a common public key without any of them knowing the corresponding secret key. The initial concept was described by Peterson in 1991. It considers multiple parties, each one coming with a secret and putting it in common through the DKG protocol. The result of this protocol is a common public-private key set. The beauty of distributed key generation is that it does not rely on any trusted third party. Additionally, it prevents single parties from having access to the full corresponding secret key. The reconstruction of this secret key would therefore result from the collaboration of a threshold of honest parties. Now you may begin to envision the benefits of using a DKG protocol to distribute the role of the opener, right? Well, DOG is nothing but a group signature scheme that leverages distributed key generation protocols to implement a distributed opening functionality. DOGS is divided into 5 modules that you can observe on Figure 9. They are organized in 3 phases. The first consists in bootstrapping the system, registering the initial users, and distributively generating an opening key. Phase 2 illustrates the intercommunications and application-related use of DOGS, for instance, to perform anonymous yet traceable event logging. And finally, Phase 3 regroups the auditing and identification methods. We also make use of a blockchain implementation for traceability and transparency purposes through 13 transaction types that we'll illustrate in the following slides. The scheme starts with the bootstrapping of the system by the issuer. The publication of the group public key and the issuer public key settles the system for future interactions. We consider the execution of the protocol for user I, which now enters the region of interest. By executing the join function, it triggers the publication of relevant joining information onto the ledger. Let us note that identifying information are encrypted with the issuer's public key before being published. This data is then downloaded by the issuer, which in turn executes the other half of the protocol. There are 2 outputs. Either the issuer rejects the user's registration, for instance if the request is malformed, or it accepts it. The biggest contribution of this entire talk lies here, in the opening key generation request. User I is authenticated. It executes the sharing function and publishes its request onto the ledger. The request contains, among others, shares of the secret key of user I. Each share is encrypted so that only one other user has access to the share intended to them. Honest users then check the shares they received and publish the result of this verification under the claim transaction. The status of the claim is either an accept or a reject. If there is at least one user issuing a correct reject claim, then user I's request is rejected. For all users in the region of interest, if the user accepted the content of user I, they in turn execute the sharing function and publish their response under the claim verification transaction. Everyone again needs to verify these transactions, and if they find them correct, share in turn. At the end, the issuer is the only one that computes the resulting opening key. It checks all the transactions related to user I request. Eventually, it generates the opening public key and publishes it. This key can then be used by anyone in the region of interest to protect their signature. The anonymity can be lifted if these users collaborate to reconstruct the corresponding secret key. The previous preliminary phase can be repeated each time a member desires to obtain a new set of opening keys. Through this slide, we only represent the actions in case the system is successfully set up and runs. User I can therefore group sign its message and publish it as a transaction, and other users in the region of interest can verify this message and the signature without threatening user I anonymity. However, in case a fraudulent message is detected, a user can request the opening of a signature. This request is publicly logged onto the blockchain. Former users that get an update of the ledger are then queried to collaborate and publish their share of the secret corresponding to the transaction to be audited. Once again, it is the issuer that reconstructs the final key and opens the signature. The result is also published and publicly verifiable by anyone through the judge algorithm. Inspired by ETH-DKG, proposed by Schindler et al., we use distributed key generation along with the blockchain implementation to support transparent distributed traceability. Previous model relied on centralized authority to ensure non-fungibility, traceability, and anonymity. We go beyond with our docs protocol as the anonymity protection is delegated to the mass of group members. However, we know that docs version 1.0 is not optimal, but it brings novel ideas in the distributed group signature field that would be interesting to develop in the future. Notably, a question we are currently researching is, can we do a distributed issuer? Hence, can we develop a fully distributed group signature scheme and use the blockchain to its full potential? But these are questions for another talk. For now, I will only thank you all for your attention and do my best to answer the questions you have.